I am super excited to chat with you guys this week because I am bringing on the podcast with me two women who, if you don't know, you're going to need to know. You're going to want to know. You're going to want to get off this podcast and go stalk them both all over social media. And I did not know either of these women until just in the last couple of months. And I'll kind of talk about how I know both of them here in just a second. But I realized a while back that we're all in similar parts in our life and we're all building businesses. And we've all recently added to our family with kiddos that maybe we didn't really see coming. We weren't really anticipating this happening. And so I thought this could be a really good podcast for those of you women who are maybe one, waiting for God to answer a prayer that you've had in your heart for years and years. Two, you're finding something coming up that you are like, okay, Lord, wasn't expecting this, but maybe how you can reframe that and look at it as a holy interruption. And then I just wanted to talk about timing and just what's going on in the hearts of us three women and kind of a thread that I'm seeing God stringing through his girls. So first, I've got Edie Wadsworth on the podcast with me today. And this is actually going to go on YouTube too, ladies. So feel free to wave away, Edie. Nobody, the podcast won't be able to see you, but the YouTube people will. So Edie has a podcast called My Best Beautiful Life. Edie, stop me if I'm wrong. She has a book called All the Pretty Things. And I have been following Edie for years and years actually on her blog, which is called Life and Grace. And so, years ago, we'd get an email whenever somebody updated their blog, a decade ago, and I'd get Edie's update. And I remember, Edie, when your whole family went through that tragic house fire and you guys lost everything. And I think I actually started unfollowing you for a hot minute because I was feeling so emotionally tied to the story of a stranger on the internet. I don't know if any of you women ever feel that way. Right now I'm watching Lindsay Letters, who is a precious woman, and her precious family and her poor daughter who was in that horrible accident a few weeks ago. And I just feel so emotionally invested in that, and praying for them and just wanting the best for their family. And I felt like that with you, with your house fire years ago. And so I kind of quit following you. And then all of a sudden Facebook was good enough to put you back in my feed. And you are just nailing, your business world in terms of you are doing exceptionally well in oils and health and wellness. And you've got a coaching group. And I know amongst all of that chaotic thing and lots of kids that you've just recently added a little one to your family. And so we're going to talk to Edie here in just a second. And then we've also got Rebekah Lyons, who I did not know about. Rebekah, I think I'm the only person left who's been living under a bridge somewhere that didn't know who Rebekah Lyons was. But I was just telling Rebekah before we went live on the podcast, I was walking around the at-home store in Kansas City, which is where all good shopping experiences happen. I don't know if you girls have those where you're at, but I was shopping. I was in an aisle looking for gold picture frames. We've actually blogged about that project. And somebody had recently introduced me to Bob Goff. And so I was pulling up his podcast. I knew that I was going to be speaking in Nashville at Christy Wright's Business Boutique and that Bob was going to be there. So I thought, I probably better do my due diligence and find out who this is. And he had an episode with Rebekah Lyons. And so I tune in, and she's got a very precious voice, and I'm listening to her and I'm like, why do I sound like such a spaz? And Rebekah Lyons, she is just cool as a cucumber on that podcast and just dropping nuggets of incredible depth and scripture. And I'm like, okay, this woman's got her act together. And so I've done a little bit of research on Rebekah, and she was talking about how her family has just recently added a young kiddo to their world as well. And I know she's the author of the book, You Are Free. I got that in a stack of books that when I was getting book proposals, a lot of the publishers were sending me stacks of books that they'd recently published. And so I've got Rebekah's book here in my bookcase. It's got such a beautiful cover, by the way, Rebekah. And she's got a brand new podcast called Rhythms of Life. She lives in Nashville. And she's just recently brought in a little girl to their family named Joy. And so, ladies, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. This is so fun. I'm so excited.
Well, Thank you so much, Jennifer.
I feel like I just talked for 20 minutes about each of you instead of with each of you. But did I do an okay job of introducing you both? Rebekah, did I miss anything? Any major things in your world?
Well, I do have a new book coming out in 2 weeks.
Okay, so I know this because you were recently interviewed by my best business buddy, Carrie Robina, for her She Walks in Truth podcast. And I knew that you have a brand new book coming out. And so I'm excited for you. And at the end of this podcast, can we talk about where people can find your book? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. And Rebekah, tell, for people who are listening, will you kind of set up what your family looks like right now? Like, where do you live? How many you got? Kind of their ages, and then what's recently happened?
Sure thing. So my husband and I will have 22 years of marriage in December, and our offspring now are all in high school. So we've got 18, 16, and 14. And our firstborn son, Cade, was born when we were 26. And we found out 6 hours later, the doctor said, we see signs of Down syndrome in your baby. And so that was my entree to motherhood and kind of a midlife reset. We had 2 more 2 years later and another one 2 years after that. And then we were done. And the adoption conversation was about 3 minutes long every 3 years. And we would be like, no, I think we're good. And then, of course, you know, the way God works is I remember we live in Franklin, Tennessee. We were in New York City, in Manhattan. I moved those 3 kids to Manhattan actually in 2010. And that's when I actually developed panic disorder and anxiety and depression. And that really actually launched my writing. I was never thinking I would be an author. And now this is my 3rd book. And it's really around mental health and purpose for women. So that's kind of my work.
Wow. You know what? I didn't even know that about you, Rebekah. Thank you No, that is amazing. I think because I've been so tuned in with your story about your little girl that I've probably just skimmed right over that. So is that what your new book's about as well?
Yes, it's Rhythms of Renewal, Trading Stress and Anxiety for a Life of Peace and Purpose. And it's real practical steps because I've now 9 years walking a healing journey. And people are always like, okay, I see myself coming out of anxiety or depression, but what do I do to keep it at bay? What are some of the practices and rhythms that I can do? Maybe I don't want to be on medication forever, or maybe I just, you know, the things that used to work aren't working as well. What does God have to say about this? And so it's these 4 simple rhythms that I give a lot of examples on how to live those out. That's what the book's about.
Okay, that is amazing. And then we're going to talk about joy here in just a second. So Edie, will you set up like your life and your family and your kids? I know there's a handful of them.
Yes, we have lots of kids. Between Steve and I, we have 9 kids. We've been married for 19 years. And when we met, he had 4 kids already. I had 2 kids. We have 2 together. And then we're in the process of adopting the little 6-year-old. So at home right now, I just launched my 3rd child to college. So she left a few weeks ago. That was really hard on Mom. And so at home now we have a 17-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I have kind of an interesting journey. I'm a family doctor, so I'm a physician by training. I gave up my practice about 10 years ago to homeschool my 2 youngest daughters, which led me, kind of like Rebekah, my own little crisis kind of led me into a writing journey. So I started my online blog. I got a book deal a few years into blogging, and I told them the only thing I won't write about is my very difficult childhood and my divorce. And I basically wrote a book about my childhood and my divorce.
Don't you love that?
That always happens. Whatever they say, what won't you talk about, they want to talk about.
I know. So, so that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah. And so you transitioned out of modern medicine into more of a holistic approach of medicine.
Yeah, and I call myself an Appalachian witch doctor. So there you go.
You call yourself a what?
An Appalachian witch doctor.
I have no idea what that is.
Well, the thing of it is, I was like Rebekah. I went through this season of terrible depression, anxiety, insomnia, fibromyalgia. I was diagnosed with like 25 things that really stemmed from a lot of lifestyle and poor coping and all of that. And in my own journey to heal myself, I knew what it was like for somebody to take 11 or 15 prescriptions.
Yeah.
And I had taken care of patients like that. And I didn't want to live like that. So it was kind of like my own healing journey. And then once I came out of the other side, I really wanted to help women find healing in a natural way. So
yeah. And I know I've messaged you a few times recently about what do you have? What oil can you do to make these hot flashes stop? So we'll talk about that again here in just a little bit. But so all 3 of us ladies in the last year have added another kiddo to our family, which I just find fascinating because I'm 48 and Edie, you are how old?
49.
And Rebekah?
45.
45. Okay. So for all practical purposes, we're like, kind of starting the second half here. And so what's interesting, I think, is that on occasion I'll put something on my Facebook page about, because we became legal guardians for Ariana. We've had her as exactly a year ago today, which I just think is fascinating. I love God's timing. When I asked my team to set this up, they didn't know that we've had her a year ago today. But as we're recording this, Ari's been with our family for a year, and we are her legal guardians. So both her mom and her dad, they're young. They both here are local in Kansas City. I am related to Ari because she is the granddaughter of my cousin. So she's like my third cousin, and I'm raising her as my daughter. So literally, a year and 2 weeks ago, we got a phone call that just kind of changed our life forever. We had been on a waiting list. Back when I was 40, we had started the adoption process, and we actually, no, I was younger than that. I was 38, and we waited for 4 years to adopt. We did the home study every year for 4 years, the fingerprinting every year for 4 years. We had the adoption books, and originally we were trying to adopt a newborn because I always knew I wanted to add to our family through adoption. We waited for a newborn for 2 years, and after we realized, you know what, nobody's giving much looks at our books and things because we already have 3 biological children who are all Caucasian. And, you know, we already kind of have a family. And as a birth mom, trying to put myself in her shoes, it seemed like a lot of the birth moms were selecting families that didn't already have kids. And I was like, gosh, I can't blame them at all. And so then we're like, well, let's try to adopt out of the foster care system. And we, you know, it won't be a newborn, and that's fine because I was getting older and older with every day as we do. And so we waited for 2 years to adopt a child out of the foster care system in Kansas City. But it turns out most of the children in the foster care system, and if you've had any involvement in the system, you know how it works. A lot of them go back to biological families pretty consistently. And I was afraid my heart was going to be ripped out of my chest, and for our 3 bio kids too. And so we really just wanted to be adopting. So about 4 years ago, we decided, you know what, I'm done. I was tired of the up and down roller coaster of adoption and tired of getting really close and, you know, a birth mom wanting to talk to us for a second time and then not getting selected. And I just thought, well, perhaps we're not supposed to be doing this. And yet over the last 4 years, there'd be different times when I'd tuck in our 3 kiddos at night, and I would say to my husband, that thing happened again where I feel like there's another child that I'm supposed to be telling goodnight to, and yet they're not in my house. So I had this sinking suspicion, not sinking, but I had this suspicion God was still up to something and that door wasn't closed. So a year and 2 weeks ago, we get a phone call from Ariana's great-grandmother. And she said, basically, I know you don't know me, but the 2 great-grandmothers from both Ari's mom and Ari's dad had gotten together and said, we need a plan for this little girl, and we need somebody to raise her. And Jason and I were nominated. So they made the phone call to us, and they're like, she needs a permanent home. The great-grandmother had been raising her, and I can't imagine, you know, being a great-grandma raising your great-granddaughter. Would you guys take her in? And originally we said, yeah, no. You know, we shut that door to adoption a long time ago. And, you know, we talked about it. We said, well, let's just do a play date. So we did a play date. And then we said, well, how about we just pay for her to go to preschool? We'll come pick her up every day and take her to preschool, and we'll just pay for it for you. Because in looking at our resources, my business had got to a place where we had the resource of being able to go get her, the flexibility and time and finances to pay for that. And then all that happened, and for you girls that don't know, is that we asked Ari to spend the night a year ago yesterday, so that we could take her to preschool the next morning. And we thought, we'll go to dinner, we'll buy her a backpack, we'll buy her a cute little outfit, we'll take her to preschool the next morning, and then this, you know, we'll just do that. And instead, she's never gone home. And now we're in the process of trying to adopt her. So that was our story. And God's just so funny with his, you know, sense of humor. And so I would love to know your stories. Rebekah, what's the story of how you just got this precious little joy in your family?
Well, like I said, we would have this conversation, but it would be fleeting. And part of it was because I had such traumatic a birth story with my firstborn that the other 2 were also C-section. And so by the 3rd C-section, the doctor's like, you have a lot of scar tissue. I don't advise actually any more biologically this way. And I remember talking to my husband and just said, well, I guess I might as well tie my tubes because that's the best time to do it if you're already in the middle of a C-section. And he said, only if you're open to adoption. And I was like, well, I love God, so I guess that makes me open to adoption. But what does that mean exactly? Like open? And so that's why it was something that it would raise. We had a lot of friends that were adopting in Atlanta at the time. And then we moved to New York City, and we're all like sharing 1,000 square feet in a high rise. And our 3 kids are like 3 bears lined up in the master bedroom. So we weren't even sure where we'd put that other one.
Right.
And also I was having my own mental health kind of crisis midlife moment.
Yeah.
So that kind of took it off the table. And then we get back to Nashville 5 years ago. And again, everyone here is talking adoption all the time. And so I remember pulling into my garage one day. You know how you're in the car and the kids go inside and you just stay in the car?
Yeah, you just need a moment. You just need a second. Yeah. You're like, just give me a second. Mom will be right in.
They would lean out. They're like, are you coming in? I'm like, yeah. I'll be there. I'm just really enjoying the silence before I walk into the aftermath after school.
Yes.
And I remember just having a conversation with God in that moment, just saying, if this is something you want us to pursue, because again, at this point, our youngest is about 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, if you want us to even engage this, you're going to need to put her right here. And it was like my hand in front of my face, because I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
And secondly, I will name her Joy. And because I knew in that season of depression, I would, in the ugly shower cries, say, like, restore to me the joy of my salvation. Like, I had this idea of like, there's light at the end of the tunnel when you're walking through something hard. And I want joy to be in the future. I want joy to be our story. And so 2 years later, I get a text from a friend in Beijing. I was done with it. Like, Jesus and I had our moment in the minivan in the garage, and we moved on. And I moved on. God did not move on. And so I get a photo of a little girl right here on my phone. It was like 2 weeks before our 20th anniversary. And my friend is in Beijing, and she says her file is going to the States tomorrow. And I knew I wanted to choose Down syndrome this time if we adopted. And so this precious 5-year-old girl with Down syndrome. And I said, why are you doing this to me? You know, like this is again, like you're like, we were done.
We closed the door. I mean, it's open a crack, but pretty much closed. Yeah.
For the most part. And I said, she's adorable. What's her name? And she said, Cara. And I said, do you mean the Greek word for joy? And she said, yes.
Oh, chills.
Right. And so be careful what you negotiate with God. He's like, I can make that happen. And so within like 3 weeks, we had her file. I didn't even know. I was like, what agency, how fast can we do a home study? It was because China, you know, a lot of are so shifting there, and it's pretty much shut down except for special needs. And then even then, you're not sure how long things can be. So she was in a foster home for 1 year, long enough for me to get placed with her friend. We got matched. We did our home study. Then China made her go back to her orphanage for the last 7 months before we brought her home. But regardless, from the day I got that photo to Gotcha Day, it was exactly 1 year to the day that we got to meet her for the first time in December. And so now brought her home.
Amazing. And so she's been with you for 9 months. Is that right?
Yeah. We got home December 15th. Yeah. So our hashtag online was Bring Joy Home for Christmas. Life-changing. And she is a joy bomb that has hit our home, and she's always like on karaoke with a disc golf ball attached in our living room at all times, singing Let It Go in Mandarin or English, whichever one you would prefer.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I totally want to talk more about her. And I love your story. And I love how God was like so literal. You're like, I'll name her Joy. And he's like, no, I got that, Rebekah. I actually will name her Joy. So I love it. So Edie, tell us your story of where your family was, a year ago at this time, and kind of what it looks like today.
Yeah. First of all, oh my gosh, your 2 stories. I'm not going to be able to talk because I'm all in tears. So after we had a house fire in 2010 that you mentioned, and everybody got out, but we sat on our front lawn and watched our house burn down. It was the most traumatic thing that had ever happened. And when we rebuilt our house, I remember standing on the back deck, and my husband and I both just had had a similar moment. That, Lord, thank you for what you do to open our eyes. I mean, sometimes it doesn't feel like a gift, but we knew that had been a gift for us. And we had, we already had a lot of kids.
Well, and the gift being just, it helped you kind of reset your priorities, or what was the gift in that? Because I know that had to take a moment to get to that place.
I don't know. I think it's just in a lot of ways. It just opened our eyes to, we have so much that we could offer our own kids, whatever. So we stood on the back deck of this house and said, just fill it up. However you need to fill it up. If you want us to adopt, if you want us to foster or whatever. And after that, we went and hired an attorney. We got a home study. We did all that. Well, about 4 months later, we were in the process of finalizing all of our home study. And my husband's youngest son called and said, I'm not doing well. I've been living on the streets in Portland. I have been doing a lot of drugs and I want to come home. Can you help? So we took him in, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I was a physician, but I was, working from home, homeschooling my kids. And now I have, a 20, whatever he was at the time, 22-year-old or whatever, who's kind of strung out, and I'm like the detox nurse. And it dawned on me a few months later, like, well, we did pray that the Lord would just fill the house up, and the house is full now, and there's no cute nursery to decorate, but I've got this precious, young adult who needs our love and help. So he lived with us for 3 years. So we put adoption on the back burner because we had our hands full.
Yeah.
And all in the meantime, my husband had this patient. He's a podiatrist, and he had a patient at work, and she was 72 years old, and she got custody of a 6-week-old baby, and it was her great grandson. And Steve's like, Miss Irene, how are you going to take care of this baby? And she said, I don't know, but his parents are both on drugs, and he was born addicted, and I've got to help him, and I don't know what else to do. So my husband sent me a picture of this little baby, and he said, I don't know how, but this little boy is ours. I'm like, what
do you do with that? You're like, I was just getting ready to text you what we should have for dinner.
Yes. And interesting story. A couple of years later, when Thomas turned 2, and Stevie had texted me pictures of this little boy the whole time. Every time she would come in to get her feet checked, he would text me, Thomas is now walking. He was in love with this little boy. And Irene left a message at his office and said, hey, can you guys take Thomas for the weekend? I'm not feeling very well. So we started taking Thomas on the weekends when he was 2. And we were kind of like his grandparents. Like, we fell in love with each other. We were so attached to him. He was attached to us. Friday was the best day because we would pick him up on Fridays. We would take him home on Sundays, and he would cry and I would cry. And we knew that someday we would end up with him. So after we had been in his life for a year or so, she went to an attorney and basically gave us custody of him in case anything ever were to happen to her. And she got pneumonia last September and really never recovered. And in January, she passed away. And Steve and I, Irene's sister called and said, can you pick Thomas up from school and tell him that Irene died? And she, was the only mom he had ever known. So we pick him up from school and tell him, and he's just crying, and I'm crying, we're all crying. And as soon as he cleared up his tears, he said, Miss Edie, she died this morning. She was dead before I left for school. So he had found her.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Before he ever left for school, and really he has such an old soul, and being raised by an older woman, he's just been wise to the world. Yeah. He already knew. Yeah. And so he came to live with us. We're still kind of in custody, we're working out everything. We have full custody of him now, but we're waiting on his biological mom to basically relinquish her rights.
Yeah. And that is our exact story as well. The biological dad, who I am related to, has given us full permission to adopt, but we're waiting on mom to do the same. And so, Edie, is he your only kiddo at home right now?
We have a 17-year-old senior.
Okay. Gotcha. So I would love to know, Rebekah, how have your other kids adjusted to life with a new one? Because I'm working on a blog post right now. I started it last night. Like things not to say to a family who's taken in another kiddo, or ways you could be a blessing to a family who's taken in a kiddo, that's not yours. And one of the things that I put on that list is to not forget the bio kids. Because we've seen like that. It's been interesting in our house because our daughter is 11. So she was 10 when Ari came to live with us. And, she'd been the princess, the only girl in the house for a long, long time. And suddenly kind of her position in the family. She was no longer the baby and no longer the only girl. And all the attention, went to Ari, the little one. And our transition was, not real easy, quite frankly, in our home. And I'm always like, how much do I share, Lord? How much do I share? But I think that for other women who maybe, are in a similar situation to you, perhaps, Edie, like they're just kind of caring for someone on a part-time basis and they're thinking maybe they could go, full-time, or they're wanting to adopt or they're wanting to foster. I think it's a good conversation to have. If our whole family we've gone to counseling. We've had Ava in counseling by herself. We've had us and Ari, the little one, in counseling, and probably Jason and I probably just need to do some counseling, just the two of us, because when I say it has changed every aspect of our family, and I think people don't realize that, and we're still so honored and so glad that we've done it. It was the right thing to do. But even just bedtime, we have to be home every night for 8:00 bedtime. Because when I tell you that at 8:15 she's fallen off the rails, I mean at 8:15 she's fallen off the rails. It can't, you know what I'm saying? So It's changed everything for us. And our bio kids have had to be very, very flexible with that. And so Rebekah, how are your other children? How are they doing with the addition of joy to your family?
No, that's such a good question and isn't often talked about. I think everyone rallies until gotcha day or whatever that moment is. You bring the child home and you get meals for a while and everyone loves on, but it really has a ripple effect that takes some time to play out after that honeymoon phase.
Yes, thank you for saying it. Mm-hmm.
And so I remember asking my counselor in advance when we first got Joy's photo and we were ready to pursue it. I said, should we do this? Like, she knows my story. She knows, what my husband and I do, how our situation with our oldest who has Down syndrome. And she said, it's actually traumatic for everyone in the family because it displaces everyone.
Thank you for saying that. You're going to make me cry. How am I going to get through this whole podcast without crying? Yeah.
She said, but it's the best thing. So it wasn't like saying don't do it because it's going to create a ripple of displacement. Yes. But just know going in that when people react, it's completely normal because it's new for not just
everybody,
for everyone. And I'm like you, I have two boys, 18 and 16. And then my daughter, who's 14, was the baby and the only girl. And she's now a freshman in high school. Now, I should mention, though, that she was praying for a baby sister that we would adopt.
And so was Ava. Yeah.
For 7 years. So I kind of want to go you got what you asked for. Yeah. But also, in fact, she and I she's a freshman in high school. Last night, we stayed up till 11:30 talking about this very thing. And we're at 9 months in. Mm-hmm. And I said, I've watched the elation and her just gushing over her. And then I've also watched a level of frustration because now Joy's smearing her makeup in her rug when she's not around because she wants to do all the things that she does. Yeah. Or if Joy's really bonding with Kate or with Pierce and one of the others feels a little less connected in that moment. Because again, Joyce.
You're pretty much in my house right now, Rebekah. Yeah.
Just trying to figure it out. And everyone's trying to figure her out and their role within that. And especially if you only have one other daughter who now is no longer your baby. Yeah. I'm finding that with Kennedy, I need to be, because she's she's a freshman. She's got her friends. She wants to go and do her own thing. So in some ways she could kind of brush it off I'm fine. But I'm like, no, I said, we need to be honest though, if there is any little bit of resentment or frustration or even could turn into anger because you just feel like my attention is over here and not with you. Yeah. I said, if you just share with me and just be honest, there's no judgment. There's no condemnation on this. We're all putting our best foot forward. Yeah. And you have welcomed her with open arms. Joy feels very loved by you. But I need to make sure that you're getting what you need as well. And I can't always know if you act like things are fine, but then under the surface, they may not be.
Right.
So as long as she and I are because I do the same, I'm doing bedtime routine with Joy every night and we are singing and reading all the books and dancing and we're getting good bonding, but then I'm realizing I'm not getting that level of bonding with my
others. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I invite Cade down because he now doesn't want to miss the singing party. He's 18, but cognitively, he's still all about Goodnight Moon and all this on the belly button book, you name it. He's happy to do anything that requires laughter and singing. So in some ways, Cade is adjusting probably the most naturally. But I would say for Pierce and Kennedy, Gabe and I have to be very proactive on time with just them. Like we drug all 4 kids across 8 countries in Europe this summer, and without a stroller because we forgot that. Which
God bless it.
I don't recommend that one.
Yeah.
We had to take turns holding her. Like here, Gabe had her on his head at one point in London, but whatever. But Gabe and I were like, we need to do something with just those 2. Because we almost have these Down syndrome bookends as children who cognitively are about at a 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade level.
Right.
We have 2 high schoolers who have had to carry some of those burdens and also really need to feel like we're hearing them, we're loving on them. We're not always expecting them to kind of pull up the slack for everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I was telling her when you bring in a kiddo, that you didn't birth, like Ari comes from hard places or she wouldn't be with us. I mean, that's the bottom line, and so her, like I was trying to explain to them, so her personality is not similar to like what Ava was at 5. It's not secure. She hasn't figured out how to handle her own emotions. Because she comes from such a, traumatic, and sometimes trauma, by the way, what we've learned through this is not always like, she was starved or beaten. That's not their trauma is shifted from home to home. Trauma is no electricity. Trauma is no consistency. Trauma is no parental guidance at all. Feeding yourself.
Right.
Like, that's traumatic when you're little. And so, in bringing her in as somebody that needed a lot of special attention, by the way, we were complete strangers to her. We had 2 play dates before we took her in permanently. I mean, and we were just going to do one overnight. So it's not like we had any time to plan for this. She came with 1 Walmart sack of clothing. That's all we had. We didn't have a car seat. We didn't have anything. And so I'll never forget that we sat down our 3 biological kids, and I've never been so proud to be their mom, because I said, okay, kids, we're either all in on this little girl or we're not in at all, because we're not going to, I'm just going to say it like I said it to my kids and Grace to me, but I said, we're not going to half-ass this little girl. So we're either all in as a family or we're all out. And there's no condemnation if you're like, I don't think we can do this, but I'm so proud of my kids because they were the ones that said, yes, we need to do this. But in saying that and having 2 high schoolers, I was telling a friend the other day, because Ari needs so much attention and so much of our time and our energy, it would be so easy right now to take our eyes off the other kids and them to be getting into things that they shouldn't be. And I have just had to pray, like, Lord, will you fill in the gaps right now? Because we can't be all the places to all the kids at the moment. And I just need to know, that you've got them. Like, Lord, keep them. That has been one of my prayers for the last year. Lord, keep them. Because I don't even know what that means, but just now I'm getting all emotional. But they're adjusting. They're doing so well, but we're all just like learning as we go. Gosh, there's no manual for this.
Well, trauma is defined as anything beyond the bounds of nurture. So you think of a kid who's moved. So a kid who has, Joy was still in an orphanage with 18 cribs back in December, in diapers, full time, taking a bottle twice a day. So she potty trained herself within 2 days of being with me by just asking and motioning me to put her on the toilet. And she's like, oh, I don't actually have to wear my pee.
God bless her.
So I've tried to explain to Kennedy and Pierce, like she never has known. She was abandoned at 4 months. She never has even known a mother or a father unit or a sibling unit. So we're having to make up for about almost 6 years of lost time. Wow. And they say every year in an orphanage or a foster home is an extra 6 months of delay. And then you add the Down syndrome piece on top. Now, surprisingly, she's actually very bright and picks up on everything because she never was raised on a screen, which I think is there's an advantage to that.
There definitely is, because we have the opposite on a screen. So,
but it is good to remind the kids, like, this, we're kind of in a season where it just requires more for her right now because we're making up. The first 6 years she had nothing. Yeah,
that's so good. Edie, tell me about your other kids. I know the majority of them are out of the house, but you do still have the one at home. So how has the family adjusted? Did you prepare? Or were they already loved Tom?
Yeah. Usually all of our older kids, actually, for the past 4 years, the college kids and the ones who had gotten married would be like, when's Tom going to be there? Because that's when we're coming home. Like they would kind of plan their visits for when he was going to be here. So the whole family already loved him. I will say that, and he did really well for the first, month or so. And then it all kind of fell apart, and he had so much anger and just so many things that he had never processed.
Yeah.
We had one come apart a few months ago, and we called our pastor and said, like, I think this was in a way demonic. We need you to come pray around our house and help us. And we got in counseling, and at one point the counselor that we see basically said, the counselor that we see basically said, after he had like, I don't know, 12 visits, she looked me in the eyes and she said, Edie, he's going to be okay. And I got close and held her hand, and I said,
say it again.
I think he is going to be okay, but I don't know if I'm going to be okay. And I think what happened with my family is we all just so rallied because he was struggling so much that we're just now kind of unraveling, like looking at each other like, okay, are you okay? I don't know. Are you okay? And my kids are so sweet and will check on me. Do you want me to take him for a little while, Mom? I know yesterday was hard, and he's really strong-willed. And so my kids have been awesome, but I feel like I love what Rebekah said about displacement, because we got him when my daughter was having her senior year, and we got to April and realized we didn't have any senior pictures yet. And like just that kind of thing where I feel like we're just figuring out as we go and making probably a ton of mistakes.
I know, like missing things. I feel like all the time I'm like, I'm sure we're missing stuff. I mean, we show up to the dentist the wrong week half the time. I'm like, how does anybody have 4 kids? And then I look at you, Edie, and I'm like, you have 9. How do you have 9 kids? I mean, I can't even fathom. And so what's your support system like, Edie? Who do you have around you? I mean, I know you said your older kids will help, and, Mom, can we give you some relief? So do you have a good support system?
Yeah, I do, but I tell you what's been hard, and I don't know if you guys have the same thing. I'm his person. And so even though I have a lot of support, he only wants me most of the time. And that has been hard. Like I've been sleeping with him, and just so it feels like it's almost like I know that he bonded with Irene, but it's this very intense, like,
neediness
with me that has been so wonderful in so many ways, but also it's just been hard to accept help from anybody because he basically wants me. So
yeah. Rebekah, what's your support system like?
We have a real close group of friends through church mainly. It's called a wraparound ministry, and it really is for families who are taking kids, whether foster care or adoption. And we were like you, we had nothing. And so people just started dropping off bags of clothes that were in size 5T or 4T, and that's pretty much dressed her. And then because she was so used to being in a crib, and she's little, she's Asian with Down syndrome, so she's short. So I was like, she could still do a toddler bed for a while. So someone literally dropped off a toddler bed with a crib mattress, like within 2 days of us being home. But we also have had in fact, we are due for another appointment with the post, with our agency. And they were really helpful, even like week 1, week 6, week 12, kind of. And they were saying, hey, they commented, I said, I feel the same. I'm Joy's person. In fact, I was gone yesterday out of town, and she FaceTimes me and says poop, because I'm the one who takes her to make sure she goes number 2 and gets wiped, right? And I was like, I'm in Arizona. I can't take you to go poop. Hopefully you haven't been holding it in for 2 days.
Yes.
But, and my work, actually, I speak nationally on the books that I write. And I benched myself professionally up until a month ago. I was used to being gone every Friday from September to May, a lot of times, just for 24 hours, but still. Yeah. And then when she came home, I was like, I can't, I gotta be her person. But then the one good thing, I have another friend who does my work, and she has 7 kids, and she had adopted a girl same age as Joy around the same time. And she said it was a good opportunity for her youngest to have to bond, but to kind of like really make that connection with my husband, because I want them to, it's going to be different. Obviously, she never had a male caregiver in China. Like that was not normal. I mean, they were drivers or doctors. Like she didn't have men in her life.
Yeah.
So to have two big brothers that are almost adults and a father, it's almost been fun for her because they're so playful and it's been good for her. But I have to sometimes go every once in a while, Gabe, you need to be in here tonight doing bedtime, and I'll like peek in and sing for a minute, but I can't be the only one doing all the main things that are part of her daily routine.
Yeah. I have just a twinge of envy. Probably that's not a good word, but because I am definitely not Ari's person. And so I've got the complete other side of the spectrum. She prefers, well, it's interesting because, and you know, in dealing with the therapist and stuff, we kind of have some theories on why, but she'll go to anybody. So if anybody was to say, hey, Ari, even if it was the mailman, well, a complete stranger, want to come over and, you know, play, go to the store, anything, she would love to. She's very social. She's got a big, loud personality, loves people. And so she would go with anybody. And, you know, she would love spending time with people, and so often to the point of where she doesn't want me, she wants everybody else, which has been hard. You know, it's been hard because, and I've tried really hard to make sure I'm nurturing that relationship she has with my husband because she's not really had like a father figure. So that's super important. So I'm so glad that those two are like, you know, they have bonded so well. But in terms of like me, there's, you know, sometimes she'll run from me and she'll hide if she wants to stay at other people's houses. And because I don't know, we're still working through like what that is. And, you know, and so that's been hard. And I'm glad that you guys, you know, both have had a lot of support. I didn't realize how important support was or how awful I've been at giving support until we got Ari. And now I'm like, oh, all those families in our church who especially have like foster care situations, because that's similar to what we're doing with just, you know, adoption, hopefully being the end result. But I think of all the people I know who are like fostering and we've never volunteered to help or, you know what, not volunteered. We've never said, we'll come over and pick up your kids next week. Cause that's what I think the support needs to look like. We have had different, you know, we have a very tight friend group and they'll say, hey, if you need some help with her, if you want her to come over, and we'll be like, okay, but it's never happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so support has been, I think, pretty tough for us, actually, even though we have people that love us dearly. We got Ari and about a month later, my parents went full-time RVing and they were our main grandparent help. And so that was hard. And so, yeah, we're still working on the support and I need to be better at asking, I think, and that would be helpful. And so perhaps I just need to move to Nashville. No, I'm kidding. Or wherever you're at, Edie. But what are you doing to take care of your marriages right now? I'm curious because what I have noticed, even though it's the hardest thing we've ever done and yet the right thing, the most beautiful thing we've ever done and yet the hardest thing, but it's, you know, it's taken its toll on our marriage as well. And just in terms of, we don't have any time. Like we'd gotten to this point where all of our kids, we had a driver in the house. Everybody could wipe their own butts. We could do a date night and not have to have a babysitter. And then now we're back to, you know, wiping bottoms and having to have an 8 o'clock bedtime. So it's taken a toll, you know, on our marriage as well. And so tell me about, you guys ladies have anything you've been doing that's been helpful?
I'll start. I think it's my husband is just as proactive as me, partly because we've always had this dynamic a little bit with Cade. Like there's always kind of this need that's staring at us at all times because he's actually more severe in his delay. And so when Joy came in and we were having so much fun, it was about probably 3 months in where we were like, we're kind of not, we're not connecting. We're missing each other. This is going to be a year. We're not going to get away on our own for even just a weekend, probably. We need to actually we make real intention to, we try to get out and walk like early morning before the kids are up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause it's like, we're awake. We have coffee in hand. We're talking and connecting. It's not hot out yet in Nashville at 6 a.m. or 6:30. So having some rhythms, we actually have a hot tub and we'll like, after she goes down at 8, sometimes we'll just sit out there and just talk, like debrief on the day. How are you? Like, how's your heart? How's work? So we're trying in that. And then I had one other thought real quick. I'm just going before I forget, is there's a book called Connected Child by Karen Purvis. She's not alive anymore, but she, it talks so much about that attachment phase is like a minimum of 6 to 9 months. And I hear what you're saying, because Joy was going to literally, she wanted to do the TSA like wand to every stranger she saw in the airport, because she watched them and she was so fascinated. I was like, don't go grope that total stranger. And
so she's very handsy and and affectionate. So is Ari. She will hug complete strangers. Absolutely. Yeah.
But the one thing I realized, the one time I did go away, Joy was mad at me when I got home, and she was like, I don't like you. You left for 24 hours. And I had to go in the room with her. She didn't want to be with me. I just had to sit there and, and I wonder, sometimes that attachment takes so long to form, and like you said, she'll run from you sometimes. And yet when you become the only option after a while, it's like she got past it, and it's still there sometimes. She's like mad if I leave, but I see just that connection growing when I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, those other people are really fun, and they're gonna
and that's the thing. Everybody else is really fun, and mom has rules.
Yeah, mom's gonna be around.
Exactly. So, Edie, what are you and your husband doing to kind of insulate and protect the marriage?
We had a similar experience to yours, because we had these two basically seniors. I had homeschooled my girls. They're 18 months apart, but they were both doing senior work, and they were gone all the time at night. One was dancing, and one was super social and doing Young Life. And so they were gone all the time, and we were like honeymooning. It was so much fun. We're like, dinner again, just mom and dad.
I told Edie came to Kansas City a few months ago. Rebekah, you just need to make a trip, and the three of us will just powwow here. But, and I had a really busy schedule, and the Lord told me, clear your schedule and make time for Edie. So we sat on the deck, and I was telling Edie that Jason and he had come home from corporate America. He'd only been home from April to September. The kids had been back in school like 2 or 3 weeks. And we were sitting out on the coffee every morning for those 2 or 3 weeks on the deck. He was like going on a bike ride. I was going for a jog. And we were like wanting to sing that song, looks like we made it. We're looking at the golf course, and we're like, oh my gosh, the business is making money, and the kids are all gone, and we can have some time to connect again. And then, ring, ring, the phone rings. And so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And we live on a lake. We live in East Tennessee, by the way, Rebekah.
In the most beautiful setting I've ever seen on Instagram.
I'm going to have to come visit.
I know. It's so fun. And so we were like going out on the boat together, having such a good time. And we got Thomas January 22nd. And 2 months almost exactly later, my husband woke up in the middle of the night, and he had like a tiny little stroke in his right eye, and he lost his vision in his right eye. Wow. And he's a podiatrist, and everything he does is this depth perception thing, and it has just rocked our world in every way you can imagine. And about 2 months after that, I fell doing an obstacle course race and tore my ACL. So by the time we could like have a sense of humor about it, we're like, wow, we just adopted a child, and you're blind, and I can't walk. Like, this is terrible. And I know. And it's like,
that's a trifecta right there.
It is. Yes.
I know. And
oh my goodness.
Honestly, I feel like life is just, as a believer, it's sort of like this rhythm of death and resurrection. And in so many ways, I feel like it's been so much like a death. I hate to say that, but in a lot of ways. And I know that God is going to rebuild, and I know that, we're going to come out on the other side, but we're not there yet. Yeah. And it's really, really hard. And, sometimes I wonder, like, Lord, what are you doing? How did you think we could handle all this? At one time in 1 year, this year alone, we had one daughter get married, one leave for college. Steve lost his vision. We adopted a 6-year-old. I tore my ACL. It's like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's been kind of, I hate to be a downer, but it's been kind of devastating.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is, Steve and I are so committed to each other that sometimes we just look at each other and go, I miss you. Like, oh, I miss you too, and we know that we're going to get back there, but it's just been been a hard season.
I'm so grateful, Edie, that you're bringing this up, because this is the stuff nobody talks about. And when I'll put on social media something like, the other day I put, to those of you who are raising some kids you didn't birth, like, just high five to you. I know how hard it is. And I told my husband, I am shocked at the amount of people, the amount of grandparents raising their grandchildren, the amount of aunts and uncles raising kids that, and perhaps it's always been this way, and I just never heard about it. Maybe it's just now that social media is prevalent, I'm hearing about it more. I don't know. But it seems to me like I'm hearing of so many people who are raising children that are not theirs. And I have felt a little bit alone in this, honestly. Maybe that's where God's taking this podcast right now, because I'm like, everybody else is like, you're doing such an amazing thing, and congratulations, and you saved a little girl. And then I'm like, no, she saved us. And then I'm like, and at the same time, like, I just feel completely like gutted in this year. Like, it is 100% God, 100% what we were supposed to do. Our whole family is still in complete agreement. We have the additional challenge of, we don't know where it's going to go, though, because with Ari's mom not wanting to consent on parental rights, now we go into a court battle. And the truth is, if she were to get her life together, Ari could be put back with her biological family, with her biological mom. And so then I'm like, then all of this, pain and stuff, I'm like, Lord, what are you doing here? And so I'm so glad that you've brought up how hard it is, because it has been the hardest year of our marriage, the hardest year for our family. And yet it is absolutely 100% what we're supposed to be doing. So thank you for just like even bringing it up. Rebekah, do you have anything to add to that? I feel like you do.
No, I hurt for you. I do,
yeah.
because it's such a good thing and a holy thing, but it doesn't come without sacrifice. Obviously, like, you have to lose your life as you know it. It's like you're putting all the chips back in the center of the table, and you're like, I remember when we were considering this, I was like, does this mean I quit my work?
Yeah.
Do I quit teaching? Do I quit writing? I kept asking God all these questions, and all I kept hearing was, do you trust me? And I'm like, that's not an answer.
Yeah.
But on some level, that really was what it required. It was like, yeah, I don't know. It was almost just a step of faith going, all I know is what is here. And all I know is that he holds us in it. And I've done hard before. We've all done hard before. And he does bring us through it. But in the middle of it, though, it gets really big and really loud. And sometimes we need to be reminded this is not the end of this story.
Yeah.
And so I just want to affirm you guys and encourage you, because your honesty and vulnerability is what made you say yes in the first place, right? Like, just to say, I know all this comfort and is great, but like, I feel compelled, like the love of God in me compels me to want to step in. And that same love that compelled you to say yes will be the love that sustains you on the days where you're like, I don't know if I have anything left. Right?
Yeah. Rebekah, thank you for that. So as we kind of finish up here, and I literally could talk to you girls for hours, but so if there is a woman listening who they have maybe are considering adoption or fostering or taking in a kiddo that they didn't birth, I want to make sure that we end this in a way that is honest, but that also is just so encouraging to that woman, because I know in my knower, I know as surely as I'm sitting here, this is the right thing to do. And even though it has rocked our family to its very core, we've had some people, they really are well-intentioned people, but they say dumb things. And so like we had a family member who said, well, you need to really be careful with this, because you don't want adopting this little girl to affect your other kids. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It affected us from day one. I mean, we're way past that. Or we're way past, are they going to be affected? But I do believe that God is using this in my other kids as well. I mean, they're seeing the hands and feet of Jesus at work. They can read about it in the Bible, but we're, trying to live it out through a little girl in our house right now. And I do believe that it's making them into better people. And, we had somebody well-intentioned, but she goes, well, this is what you prayed for, when we were in the heat of just feeling kind of traumatized. And I was like, oh gosh, that was like such the horrible thing to say in the moment, because we just didn't know what we didn't know about how this would affect every aspect of our life. And yet I still know that I know that it's a good thing and God's going to use all of this for good. And it's not just like we're blessing this little girl. She's blessing the heck out of us. She's pulling things out of me that I didn't realize, crap and BS that were still there in my heart. Interesting things like even in my business, God brought Ari into our family at the height of my business when we had just hit a level financially in our business that I don't know that I ever thought was attainable. And, I'm getting book offers and our everything was like at, the height of it. And then we get a 5-year-old and I'm like, then she was 4 and I'm like, Lord, what are you doing? Because I was able to stay home with our other 3 children and I ran the business from home. But what I found and God showed me is that I had pride attached to that. And I had, because I can't be as available to Ari as what I was for the other 3 on like a daily basis. My husband's had to do that because now I have 7 people working for us in this company who depend on me to, bring a paycheck home to their families. And so Jason's been doing a lot of the like field trips and, and they've bonded so well. And I've been like, oh, I'm a horrible mother. I stayed home full time with our other 3. And for this one, I, have a business trip every other month or something. And God's just really been working that out in my heart, like that issue of pride that I had attached to being a stay-at-home mom, because I can't do that with this one. And I know that. And yeah, it's interesting what she's bringing out in me and in our family. And it's so good. But what would you ladies say to somebody who's considering adoption? They're considering fostering, they're considering raising their sister's kids, they're considering anything. I'd love to know your final thoughts as we end up here. Edie, you want to go first?
Sure. Oh, I feel like it's so interesting the way this has all affected myself, my business, our family. I wrote my first book and it was called All the Pretty Things. And it was a spiritual memoir about how I grew up with an alcoholic father in abuse and poverty and neglect and loss. And I grew up way too fast. And when I wrote my book 4 years ago, I went into the writing of the book thinking I didn't get what I needed. That's why, I have whatever issues I have. At the time I was struggling with depression and anxiety. And after I wrote that book, what I realized is I had exactly the perfect childhood. It was exactly the perfect experience for me to find the Lord and to be rescued by him. And now when I look at Thomas, I see how God is writing such a beautiful story because nobody can understand Thomas's upbringing like I can.
Yeah.
Like I so intimately know what it's like to be him.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's been such a confirmation of what I learned when I wrote my story is that when we reimagine our past, what a beautiful gift we've all been given in exactly the way it worked out. And I just feel like I would never have known the full circle of that without this story with Thomas. I never would have seen it full circle. And I look at him now and I feel like in some ways he is the redemption of my dad. My sisters will say to me all the time, oh my gosh, he looks just like Papa Jim, because he always goes around with no shirt on, just his little underwear or just his little jeans, cowboy boots. And my dad never wore a shirt. And so we call him all the time. We say, oh my gosh, he's just like Jim, or he's just like Papa Jim. And I feel like what a beautiful redemption story where God is taking a relationship that was so painful for me. I always used to say that having him for a dad was equal parts charm and curse. He was the most amazing person I ever knew, and he hurt me the worst of anybody I ever knew. And I feel like it's almost like God sent us Thomas in so many ways, but it's a redemption in every possible scenario. And I wouldn't have known that without that. Yes. And I love so much what Rebekah said is that, do we just trust that God's going to work out the work schedule and he's going to work out all the little details and he's going to fill in the gap when I'm not exactly what I could have been for my teenage daughters. And he's going to fill in the gap in my marriage. And so it's almost like I feel like the last 9 months has been just literally, sometimes I envision it me hanging on, but I know it's just God hanging on. He's just holding me. He's hanging on when I can't hang on. And I totally trust that what he's doing in this will be so incredible for all of us involved. And I don't always live and walk in that trust, but I'm so thankful to hear your stories because it just reminds me of how in control he is of all of it.
Yeah. And thank you for that. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to get both you ladies on a podcast. Cause I know there's other women. There has to be more than 3 of us who are going, my Lord, this is tough. Yes, I prayed for this, and yes, I asked for it, but man, I didn't realize all this other stuff was going to come with it. And so thank you for that, Edie. And Edie, if somebody wants to find you online, if they want to connect with you, and by the way, if you don't follow Edie on Instagram, her Instagram feed is ridiculously beautiful. I was just telling you that earlier. And in her stories, you can see little Tom Tom and hear his voice. And if there aren't 2 cuter people on the planet, you and him with your Southern twangs, I'm like, how do I get one of those? How do I get that accent? I need that. I also, just so you know, Edie, I also have this theory in all of my business coaching. I tell every woman I coach, if you have an accent, you'll make more money. It's a known fact. You will make more money if you have an accent. So kudos to you, sis. But where should they find you on social media or the internet?
That's funny. It's just my name on Instagram, Edie Wadsworth. And then I have my blog for years has been called Life in Grace. So on Facebook, I'm Life in Grace. And we call Thomas, he's like raising a 65-year-old Tom Sawyer. So he is so special, so hilarious. The things that he says and the way that he says it with his little Appalachian twang, it's like the best gift ever.
Well, and I want you to know, Edie, from someone who watches your life from the outside, we just met in real life just in the last couple of months, but it just looks so beautiful. And I just see God's hand all over it. Everything from like where your house is built at and to, the view that you have, and just, you can feel the love coming through your Instagram stories for that kiddo. And so big high five, sis, big hugs to you. I love you so much. So thank you for being here. Rebekah, as we end, is there anything you'd want to say to the woman who's like, oh, I was thinking about adoption until Jennifer made it sound like a hot stinking mess, and now I'm like running in the other direction? What would you want to say to her as we end up here?
I would say if it's something that has surfaced over and over, it's like sand.
Yes.
For me, it's like sand in your shoe. It's like irritating, but you can't avoid it. And it keeps coming back around and coming back around. And I think that's kind of like the whisper of God. He invites us into things, but usually they require sacrifice and surrender. So we were like, no, I'll go without that. Yeah. But what he knows, and what you guys are actually living now, is that, it's probably going to be the death of some things in our lives, but it's also going to be the resurrection of some new things in our lives. And I remember even with Cade and now with Joy again, I told my husband, I said, I feel like I felt the day I got Cade's diagnosis, except 17 years later. What I thought our empty nesting season would look like is now back to ground zero. I have no idea. It's completely a crapshoot as to what this will look like in 3, 5, 10 years. But what I do know is that every hard season that God has walked us through has produced new life.
Beautiful fruit.
For me. And it's changed trajectories of where I thought I was going. And I didn't want to go to New York. I wound up having panic disorder. And now I have a ministry to help people in mental illness. I didn't pick that. That wasn't my plan. Yeah. But on the other side of these things that feel hard or overwhelming, he always brings this like vibrance. It's like death precedes resurrection. And so I would just encourage, it will be hard because it's going to require new maturity, new growth, new surrender. But on the other side of that, you become this old soul that just is like, hey, he's always around the bend. He's going to surprise us. It's not the end. It's going to be good. And we just need to remind each other of that. I think sometimes in the middle of it.
In the thick of it. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Exactly.
So tell us about your new book real quick. It comes out in 2 weeks, which is probably about the time this podcast will air. And so it's called The Rhythms of Life. Is that right?
So the podcast is Rhythms for Life, but the book is Rhythms of Renewal, because it's just this trading stress and anxiety for life of peace and purpose. Because I kept teaching mental health on all these fronts and from a lens of faith. But then people would say, no, practically though, what are actionable practical steps I can put in my everyday life so that I can have sustained emotional, relational, and spiritual health? And it took me back to the drawing board. The book is full of science and research and faith. And it's 4 simple rhythms: rest, restore, connect, create. And the first 2 are input rhythms, and the last 2 are output rhythms. And so rest is for your inner life, your spiritual life, things like tech detox or morning routine or taking or routines for deep sleep, stuff like that. And then restore is your physical health. So your body, like eat smart, brain food, permission to play. And then the last two are connect, which is your relational health on marriage, conflict resolution, vulnerability, intimacy, all that. And then the last one is create. And it's all about what you offer the world, your passion, your vocation, your work. So the little chapters about recovering that, dreaming again, working with your hands, learning something new, and saying yes to risk.
I love it. Where should people find you on the social interwebs?
Sure.
Do you like Instagram best? Do you like Facebook best?
Instagram for sure. I have way too many stories of joy. I feel like she took over my Instagram.
I feel like the same with Ari, and I've had to be really conscious of that too, because I'm like, because I know my other kids are like, what the heck?
I know.
And I'm like, oh yeah, here's a picture of me and our oldest son Noah at the football game Friday night.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. So ladies, you are just like literally a breath of fresh air to me. Thank you. And I hope that somebody who's listening to this feels like she just had a little bit of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation for her soul too. So I want to thank you both for being here. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast, thank you guys for being here. Please do me a favor. If you think this podcast episode would be a blessing to somebody, would you forward this on to that sweet, precious person that you know? Or if you know of some people who are in, similar situations to what the three of us ladies were, and you could be a blessing to them just by saying, hey girl, send them a text. We're going to pick up the kiddos, tonight at 6 so you and your husband can have a night off. Go do that. You have no idea the ripple effect that could have, just giving a family a little bit of a break and loving on them. So as always, I appreciate you guys being here, and we'll be back again next week with another episode. Until then, stay creative. Bye-bye.